Now, the maritime dispute pitting Kenya and Somalia seems to have degenerated into a tit-for-tat warfare away from the arbitration process at the International Court of Justice. Ford Kenya party leader Moses Wetangula was Kenya's foreign affairs minister when Somalia lodged a complaint at the ICJ to determine the dispute. He spoke to our reporter Murimi Mwangi in Parliament. Listen in.
Day 3 since that strongly worded statement from the Kenyan Foreign Affairs Ministry with regard to what appears to be a renewed diplomatic tiff between Kenya and Somalia over the maritime border between the two countries, with Kenya protesting what it claims was a decision by Somalia to auction oil and gas deposits located in a section that is still contentious and subject to a judicial process before the International Criminal or the International Court of Justice at The Hague. And I will be speaking to a man who has served as Kenya's Foreign Affairs Ministry with a career that began in that ministry as an assistant minister, Bungoma Senator Moses Wetangula. What do you make of this latest diplomatic turn of events, given that also Somalia has responded just yesterday denying having auctioned these contentious deposits in that section that is still subject to adjudication by courts?
Well, the spat between Kenya and Somalia that I've seen in the last 2 or so days is regrettable. Regrettable because Kenya and Somalia have so much in common that there shouldn't be any room for disagreements that would lead to the level of recalling or sending away diplomats, as the case may be. I know that in diplomacy, recalling diplomats for consultation or sending diplomats for further consultation in their own capitals is normal. But it is not normal when it comes to a situation between countries that are so dependent on each other, like Kenya and Somalia. Now, to put things in perspective, as foreign minister, I did, under my watch, negotiate and engage the government of Somalia at the time, and we signed an agreement between the two governments that clearly identified the boundary between Kenya and Somalia in the maritime waters of the Indian Ocean. And the agreement was that we were to have a horizontal or latitudinal boundary running from the V, where the Somali boundary ends, meeting Kenya, parallel to the latitudes into the sea, going for 450 nautical miles. We deposited the agreement with the AU. We did deposit the maps that were then redrafted at the time with both the AU and the UN as Kenya's territorial waters. And this matter went uninterrupted until much later, when there were continuous changes of leadership and government in Somalia, that Somalia decided to rethink the position. And in so doing, they took the correct steps by going to the International Court of Justice, a case that is still ongoing, remains sub judice, and under the rules of court procedures, we can't discuss too much the merits and demerits of the case. That notwithstanding, however, there are mechanisms of resolving problems within this region. We have the IGAD framework that if countries within IGAD and Kenya and Somalia have problems, they can go to IGAD for arbitration. We have the AU, Peace and Security Council, that resolves disputes between any African Union member states. And before Somalia went to the International Court of Justice, one would have advised that they probably should have gone to these organs, but they chose to bypass them. Looking at things as they are, the first statement that came out from the Kenyan government, I thought was a bit hasty and too heavy in its wording. In fact, in my view, I thought we were using a hammer to kill a fly. And I'm happy that the Minister of Foreign Affairs has retraced its footsteps and used more friendly, more diplomatic language in the matter. And Somalia itself, that caused the violent reaction from Kenya, has disowned what Kenya says the Somalis did. If Somalia had circulated maps that do not reflect the reality of the boundary between Kenya and Somalia in the maritime region, one of the things that Kenya would quickly do is when they take matters to those auctions, as they're talking about, there is a doctrine in law called caveat emptor, which in simple English means buyer beware. Kenya can issue a notice to any of those people who are interested in those oil blocks that they do not belong to Somalia, and anybody who engages in any transaction on them is unlikely to get a good title out of it. Number two, Kenya should heighten its own activities in this particular area. You claim your territory, you have your territory by occupation. Occupation on any territory, whether it's on the high seas or on the ground, is key. And Kenya should engage its partners, its friends, and whoever in showing very active presence of our country's interest in this area, because I know for a fact that this area is full of resources. There's a lot of tuna fish, one of the biggest hauls of tuna fish in the Indian Ocean coast. We have gas, we have oil, and we have other resources that can be found in the seabed. And 450 nautical miles is not small territory. You're talking of a territory as far as from here to Tororo in Uganda, which is a very, very huge territory. I stand by our government in the position they're taking, but encourage them to use less aggressive language to tell the whole world that this territory belongs to Kenya. Kenya has enough capacity within our own economic structures to even explore for the oil and the gas in the area without going to auction the blocks in London or anywhere else.
But Mheshimiwa,
all right, various intrigues right there made valid by the Moses Wetangula, who was once the Foreign Affairs Minister. Now, my colleague Trix Ingado now walks us through a timeline of this dispute between Kenya and Somalia. Trix.
Thank you, Jesse. Now, why would two friends use such heavy-handed actions towards one another? Well, it's all about natural resources. Like the then Foreign Affairs Minister, Moses Wetangula, has just said, this area is rich in oil and gas deposits, and those tuna, you know, everybody loves tuna. It's a highly wanted commodity across the world. So if a country can tap into those natural resources, export, and we know oil is even referred to as black gold. So naturally, a country would be touchy about wanting to possess this kind of resources, especially if the matter is in court. And we know that this is the matter that is before the ICJ, and it is awaiting ruling. So this maritime zone is 62,000 square kilometers off the Indian Ocean, and it sort of intersects in a V-shaped area. And what Somalia wanted when it presented the issue before the ICJ is that it wanted this issue the area demarcated, and them to come out with a clear map that says this belongs to Kenya and this belongs to Somalia or either country. So it is rich in oil and gas deposit, like I said, and the exploration activities by Kenya were actually halted when the matter was taken to the ICJ as a show of good faith. So the fact that allegations that Somalia would be trying to sell off blocks of this area to would-be bidders is something that Kenya would not take lightly, because Kenya itself has not been going on with any activities that would be economically fruitful in that area. So it's a really sensitive issue at this time. Let's move on and see what some other issues that surround this particular maritime zone. Dialogue between these two nations, Somalia and Kenya, did fall through years back. And in 2014, Somalia decided that it would be better to let the independent body, which is the ICJ, to intervene, to look into the matter and just figure out who owns what and what are the real maps that should be put into effect. So that's in 2015. And Kenya insisted and on the 1979 exclusive economic zone as one of the reasons that it lays claim to this maritime region. Well, it also questioned the ICJ's jurisdiction over this particular area. So Kenya felt like the ICJ maybe did not have the right to look over or to oversee this matter. But again, in 2017, it lost that its preliminary objections to the ICJ handling the matter, and therefore it remains that the ICJ is supposed to keep on looking into the matter and come up with a conclusive ruling that decides who lays claim to the resources in that particular contested area. And then a ruling will determine the boundaries. Like some of the elements that come out of this dispute are that Kenya claims that Somalia presented a map that shows that it has possession of this area, and we know this has not yet been decided yet as per the court. So Somalia unilaterally auctioned off oil and gas blocks in the disputed area. Now, this is the major allegation that Kenya has come out strongly to rebuke. And then alleged auction was to the highest predatory bidders. And these are some of these highest predatory bidders are just some of the countries in Europe that are having its eye out. And this was during the oil and gas conference of Somalia that was held in London, where this allegedly took place. And then the bidders are allegedly from the United Kingdom, the Northern Ireland and Norway. And then Kenya did call for its ambassador, Lucas Tumbo, to come back from Somalia. And this has been said that he was, the terms that are running around media are that they were expelled and they were recalled. But then we have had P.S. Macharia of the Foreign Affairs Minister going back and saying these diplomats are just consulting back with their people and they have not been expelled, or rather neither country has cut diplomatic ties with one another, which would be a rather harsh move, as Moses Wetangula has just said earlier on. And Nairobi wants Mogadishu to immediately withdraw said map. This is the map that they're saying was presented during the Somalia Oil and Gas Conference in London that shows that Somalia has rights over this disputed area. Somalia's ambassador to Kenya, Mohamed Noor, also returned to Mogadishu, and he was part of a meeting, a high-level meeting that took place in Mogadishu, just to discuss this issue, just showing you how weighty the matter is. And then Somalia did deny bidding potential Kenyan maritime zones. It said it has done no such thing and is also not planning to do anything of the sort, and it is also going to give its respect to the ICJ and allow the proceedings to go on until a final decision is made. So Somalia has come out strongly to deny the allegations from Kenya that have resulted in what would seem to be a diplomatic spat. And it says through the high-level meeting, Somalia came out to say that it will continue to respect the proceedings, to respect the processes of the ICJ, and it is not carrying out any sort of operations or any sort of bidding or selling off of any blocks of oil and gas rich areas of the Indian Ocean that Kenya also would like to lay claim to. And that is it on that timeline of the spat between Kenya and Somalia. Back to you, Jesse.
All right, many thanks, Trix Ingado. Right there, breaking down this long protracted dispute. This seemed to happen back in 2009, ever since that memorandum of understanding was signed. But in order to actually break this down for us and take a look at the dispute in a keener perspective, Professor George Wajackoyah, who's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and also a law scholar, is already in studio just to highlight this particular dispute between Kenya and Somalia, whether it is truly a dispute or not. We're also joined by Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdi Samad, who's a Horn of Africa analyst, and these two gentlemen will help us in breaking down this particular protracted dispute between Kenya and Somalia that lays claims to around 100 kilometers squared of coastline, off the coastline triangle, and whether Kenya and Somalia will actually grow out of it, whether an amicable solution will be brought forth despite this dispute between these two countries. That's Professor George Wajackoyah, the advocate of the High Court of Kenya and also a law scholar, and Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdisamad, who's a Horn of Africa analyst, to join us as we get deeper into this particular discussion and take a look at the nitty-gritty details surrounding the ICJ, the court, the case that is currently ongoing there, the memorandum of understanding as well, and perhaps breaking this down to layman's language, just getting to understand this particular dispute between Kenya and Somalia over the border row. Let's take a short break right now. We'll leave you with Destination Africa. We'll be back in a jiffy.
This is KTN News.
It in and it ends up in the back of the net. They go to Kevin De Bruyne. Comes into it, and look at goal for a shot, it's in the net! It took a deflection, but it goes into the net!
We are artists of opportunity, 1.3 billion entrepreneurs. African is our edge on the world. Every day is our cup final, and the 90 minutes starts now. This is Chance, invented in Africa.
On Business Today, we take your business to the top with insightful interviews coupled with industry analysis that helps your business make the right decisions.
Working in the informal sector definitely is something that provides for many Kenyans, but it also comes with its set of unique challenges.
We follow the money as it trades, and we tell you just how the exchange rate affects businesses.
Business Today opens up doors to opportunities that helps you to walk through success in the economic world.
Point Blank this Wednesday. Tony Gashoka hosts the African Union Special Envoy Raila Odinga. The menu entails handshake mystery and intrigues, the renewed and lethal fight against graft, and also the state of politics in the country. Make a date with Baba on Point Blank, only on KTN News.
This is KTN News.
Welcome back. Many thanks for staying with Bottom Line Africa. We now get deeper into the discussion centered on the Kenya Somalia territory dispute. And in studio, already joining us is Professor George Wajakoya, who's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and also a law scholar. Many thanks for making time. As well as Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdi Samad, Horn of Africa analyst, who's joining us from our city center studios. Allow me to begin with you, Professor. In terms of this protracted dispute, quote unquote, between Kenya and Somalia, break it down in layman's language for us, where it all resonated from and the point we are at right now.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I've just flown long hours, so my voice is not with me.
It's
but
okay.
I'll try my level best.
It's okay.
When it comes to international law is not binding. Has never been. It's a negotiatory instrument where both parties come in to speak to each other. And at the end of the day, if nothing comes out of it, then there are other methodologies that can be applied. But when you look at the whole saga, which I believe has been blown out of proportion by the PS, first of all, the permanent secretary was not allowed under international protocol to issue any statement, any statement that would actually create some kind of disharmony among Kenyans, Somalians, and the international community. That statement ought to have, first of all, been scrutinized through at cabinet level, and it's only the Minister for Foreign Affairs who ought to have. And I totally agree with the Honorable Moses Wetangula. He has spoken like a statesman, and for the first time, I've given him thumbs up because of the way he clarified what ought to have happened at that particular time. Thirdly, the International Court of Justice is an arbiter of the United Nations. It's the court established by the Statute of Rome under Articles 36. Other important articles are 38, Article 40, 41, and 44. Besides that, we have Article 83, but we are not in a law classroom where I'm going to elaborate on that one. Now, when it comes to issue of demarcation of borders, territorial integrity, territorial boundaries, which have an element that is likely to bring in a dispute. That is taken very seriously, and laws on both sides of the divide have to be taken under consideration because that becomes a source of law, a source of customary law to the international norms of justice. Now, there are also other formulas that ought to be approached before we go to the court itself. We have negotiations of any kind, negotiations by people of eminent personalities, country to country bilateral, the choice of a third party to come and become an umpire, and whatever. But when it comes to the memorandum of association, the way I was reading about it on the plane, it was something that was pushed in by foreigners. It was pushed in by the ambassador of Norway.
All right.
And why the Attorney General came in to, first of all, look at that memorandum, the then Attorney General, is something that is very suspect. But I'll stop here for you to continue.
All right. We'll definitely delve deeper into the Memorandum of Association as well as the jurisdiction of the ICJ. Let's interact with Abdi Wahab, who's a Horn of Africa analyst. We well know of this row that involves the 100 square kilometers, which has now escalated after Nairobi cut diplomatic relations with Somalia, Mogadishu rather, over that claim that the latter had auctioned oil blocks, a claim that has been denied by Somalia, stating that it is ready and willing to actually cooperate with Kenya in finding an amicable solution to this particular crisis. Now, there seems to be a sense of betrayal from Nairobi, especially with the statement that was highlighted by Kenya in terms of standing with Somalia, with its troubled neighbor. That's how they stated it, in sending troops to fight the Al-Shabaab group. Kenya and Somalia are enjoined at the hip, so to speak, in terms of being partners, not just neighbors. What repercussions are we staring at in terms of this bilateral dispute and whether it is not resolved?
The diplomatic role between the Somalia and Kenya is the least desirable thing anyone can expect at this critical time the history of both nations. As you are aware that there's thousands of Kenyan soldiers inside Somalia as peacekeeping forces. As aware that a lot of Kenyan expertise are inside Somalia who are working with NGOs and civil society organizations. And in fact, if you look at the history of the two sister neighbors, it's a time whereby in fact, it has drastically improved both, the trade between the two countries. And this, in fact, it seems what you call unexpected, because if you look at the progress in dispute or the border in dispute, as we speak right now is in front of what you call International Court of Justice, whereby the two neighboring states are expecting and they are going to, in fact, to accept any verdict from the International Court of Justice. And that's one issue. Secondly, what Somalia they have done in London conference was only, the sharing, the data sharing and data assessment has nothing to do with auctioning the data, according to Somali version of his stories. So it seems, the Kenyans are overreacting about these issues. Let me tell you one thing and clarify the one issue which is so important to me and many others. Turkish and Kenya are so important partners for Somali communities. What they have done, they will never forget the Somali community, wherever they are. As you are aware that Kenya, they are hosting one of the largest refugee population on earth, which almost 600,000 of them are Somali origin, whereby 1,000,000 refugees from Syria, now the Europeans are complaining. What about the 600,000 refugees country was hosting who came from the third world country? That, Somali, they will never forget. So the Somali communities are so surprised, the move and overreacting of our Kenyan brothers. And in fact, our Kenyan government, what they have done was, in fact, they are overreacting. It's better, what they call a soft diplomacy. They can call high-level, delegation from Somalia. They can come together, share the grievances or the dispute. They can easily, resolve this problem outside the court. And in fact, the Somali leaders and the Somali population are so, eager, are so, they want to resolve this issue outside the court, the court issues. So all in all, what I'm saying is, what they have done in what you call a London conference was not the auctioning the progress. It was only the data sharing and data assessment. If anything goes wrong, I think, the Kenyans, to be honest with you, the Somali society, they see Madaxweyne Uhuru Kenyatta as a big brother who came and helped the Somali community. And they will never forget what they have done, the Kenyans have done inside Somalia. So, exaggeration in the whole thing and, acting like what you call, a civil society activism is not good for both countries. In fact, the first time I hear there is a dispute between, a maritime dispute between the Somalia and Kenya, it was 2009. Before that, there was no dispute between Somalia and Kenya, maritime dispute between Somalia and Kenya. All in all, what basically I'm saying is, I think this thing, it's under control. So something out of control, whereby the two neighboring sisters, they can renegotiate and they can share the information and they can easily resolve the problem between the two countries.
All right, many thanks, Abdi Wahab. Now over to you, Professor. It seems that narrative of overreaction is shared by both you and Abdi Wahab on the other side of our City Center studios. But let's look at the compromise. How can we actually get to a compromise between these two countries? Because it's already done. Kenya seems to have made its move, and Somalia has actually said that it has nothing against Kenya and it is looking forward to a way to solve this particular dispute. Avenues of resolution of this particular conflict or this dispute between Kenya and Somalia, because we well know of the memorandum of understanding that was signed in 2009 around April there. Is that still a viable option? You mentioned that it might not hold water in international law. Tell us more about this.
Actually, if you look at the way that memorandum of understanding was signed, you'll find out that the Kenyan part did not do due diligence as to its legitimacy. Because according to the monoist constitution of Somalia, of course we are now in a duality of constitution, any agreement signed by any top official representing the government of Somalia had to be ratified by Somali parliament. So the Kenyan government ought to have said, okay, we have signed today, go and ratify it. After you ratify it, let us talk. But then they came and sat deceiving us Kenyans, who are very bright people in the world, that there was something which was not there in the first place. And because the Somali parliament refused it outright, then it held no kind of legitimacy, even though if you look into the decision of the court, the ICJ, they've come up and also put their own tenets on it. But the solution to this is very simple. The president ought to pick up a phone, call his counterpart, and put things at bay. Number two, the parliament should have parliamentary select committee on foreign affairs to investigate the character of this permanent secretary, because he has put our country into disarray. He more or less has come up with one limbo of taking matters on his own right. Did he consult Matiang'i, who is actually in charge of the cabinet? Did he consult the cabinet? Did he consult the president? Why was that statement not issued by the Minister of Foreign Affairs?
All right.
Matters as grave as this one ought to have been, first of all, scrutinized through the intelligence to find out. And also when it comes to stock exchange, auctioning is done by stock exchange. We would have found that, we could have wanted to find out why were these shares floated, which stock exchange street actually took notice of this, and then we establish facts, which companies were involved. And then we can actually go the American way, where they have come in and they have told certain company in China that because you went to trade with Iraq, you broke our protocol on trade, you are not allowed into America. But because the daughter of that person, Hyundai company, went to Canada after that, she was arrested and she's being extradited to the United States. So if companies were found to be, or to have bought those shares through auction, all that needs to be done is what Honorable Wetangula has said.
Okay.
Yes.
Allow me to ask this. A good friend of the show, Dr. Chris Abongo, has fronted a question to you, asking you to clearly explain the 6 maritime zones of the United Nations Convention in the Law of the Sea of 1982, and does Kenya actually have an international locus standi according to it?
If I may actually look into it, of course, I'm a policy guy. I have to go out and look into the policy. I don't know everything. But Kenya doesn't have locus standi because it has a reservation in the treaty on arbitration. Yes, it's a member of the treaty, it signed the convention, but it came up and put a reservation that in case of dispute resolution, we shall come into it. What they didn't do is they did not give an alternative, just like what happened in Japan, in the tuna case, where Japan appeared before the tribunal, International Territorial Dispute Tribunal, and it alleged that yes, even though we did not actually we did make a reservation, but we are giving this alternative. We can sort out this issue through diplomatic role, and the ICJ said no, that this alternative is not viable.
All right, and now that you've brought up the ICJ issue, let's take a look at the role of the ICJ and the jurisdiction it holds in such cases.
Yeah, the ICJ was established by the Treaty of Rome to act or to work in conjunction with the United Nations, whereby willing members who had a dispute, having gone out through the laid down procedures, would lodge a complaint with the ICJ, and the issue of consent becomes very important to the other party. The other party has to consent to appear before the court, and you have case law in the case of Italy versus Albania, which sucked in United Kingdom and Germany during that particular time, where Albania came in and said, well, even though the matter in question, because it involved gold distribution and what have you, and the ICJ had actually found for Albania, Albanians came out when the matter went through the UN and said, no, we are not consenting. So issue of consent is very important. ICJ is there, you bring the dispute before it, but other members must actually accept whether they have signed the treaty or not.
All right.
Now, ICJ has jurisdiction over state matters, not individual matters or matters which are coming out of non-governmental organizations. And it can look into it, it can provide an opinion. In this particular case, instead of going through the arbitration way, somebody ought to write to the ICJ seeking an opinion as to the perimeters of the matters that were before it.
All right, let me engage Abdi Wahab as we conclude. Now that we seem to take a look at the narrative that Kenya might have overreacted, would a compromise be the best alternative to solve this particular dispute? Because we're staring at two countries that have heavily invested in each other. I mean, we have expatriates working in Somalia from Kenya who are quite substantial in number, and we well know of Kenya's support to the Horn of African nation.
And to be honest with you, they have no option unless they compromise to each other, unless they come together, share the information, discuss the matter accordingly, and even they can even resolve this kind of dispute outside the court. I don't think so. Kenya can refuse that. Also, the Somalia can refuse that. The only thing we're expecting is our charismatic leaders come together, discuss the issue, harmonize their views, then both countries will move on. And I don't think any cause of alarm for this particular issue. The only media and maybe the permanent secretary exaggerating the whole thing. I don't think any cause of alarm in this case, to be honest with you.
Okay, many thanks. Due to time, we'll have to wrap it up right there, but it's a discussion that is ongoing, and we'll definitely take a look at the stand that both countries take into this particular matter, the Kenya-Somalia territory dispute. Professor George Wajakoya, many thanks for shedding more light on the role of the ICJ and the MOU and how Kenya should actually approach this particular matter, and as well as Somalia. Abdi Wahab Sheikh Abdi Samad, Horn of Africa analyst, was joining us from our city center studios. Many thanks for watching Bottom Line Africa. We've come to the tail end of the broadcast. Of course, we'll continue informing you about this particular developments and many more across the continent and the world.